The Great Sioux War of 1876 remains one of the most defining conflicts in United States history. A collision of expanding American ambition and the sovereign resistance of the Lakota Sioux and Northern Cheyenne nations. To understand this war is to understand a world rapidly changing. A world in which indigenous nations who had lived for countless generations in the northern plains faced the growing pressure of settlers, railroads, and military campaigns that would permanently reshape their homelands. This conflict was not just a matter of land, it was a matter of identity, belief, survival, and the last great struggle to preserve a way of life intimately tied to the Black Hills, a place the Lakota called Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. Decades before the fighting broke out, the United States entered into treaties that attempted to control the relationship between settlers, the U.S. government, and Plains tribes. These treaties reflected a rapidly shifting balance of power. In the early 19th century, the Lakota Sioux were strong, influential, and widely feared by other tribes for their military skill, their warrior culture, and their mastery of the horse. They hunted buffalo across millions of acres stretching from the Missouri River to the Bighorn Mountains. Their camps moved with the seasons, following the herds and sustaining a deeply spiritual and communal way of life. But while the Lakota were expanding, the United States was expanding even faster, building railroads across the plains and encouraging westward settlement through government incentives and military protection. Every year, more American citizens crossed into lands that had belonged to the Lakota by tradition and later by treaty. In 1851, the first Fort Laramie Treaty attempted to establish peace along the emigrant trails. It recognized large territories belonging to the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and other Plains nations, and it promised annuities in exchange for safe passage of settlers. But the treaty was only partially enforced, and violations came quickly, mostly from the American side. Forts were built in contested regions, wagon trains crossed hunting grounds, and gold seekers surged across lands never meant to host foreign settlement. Still, the Lakota adapted, navigating diplomacy and conflict as needed, and the uneasy balance continued for another decade. Everything shifted dramatically in the 1860s. The United States, fighting the Civil War, deployed troops across the West to maintain supply lines and communication routes. The Bozeman Trail, which cut directly through the heart of Lakota territory to reach the Montana goldfields, became a flashpoint. Its construction brought soldiers, forts, and settlers into places the Lakota held sacred. The Lakota, along with the Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho, resisted fiercely. The war that followed became known as Red Cloud's War. Led by the Oglala Lakota chief Red Cloud, indigenous warriors attacked military posts, supply trains, and troops along the trail. In 1866, they won one of the most decisive victories in Native American history, the Fetterman Fight, in which 81 U.S. soldiers were lured from Fort Phil Kearny and killed to the last man. This defeat shocked the nation and forced the U.S. government to negotiate. The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty was one of the most important agreements ever signed between the United States and the Lakota. It ended Red Cloud's War and established the Great Sioux Reservation, which included the Black Hills. The treaty also recognized that the western regions stretching across present-day Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas would remain unceded Indian territory. Land the Lakota and their allies could continue to use freely for hunting. The U.S. Army abandoned the Bozeman Trail forts, and for a brief moment, it seemed peace might hold. To the Lakota, the Black Hills were sacred. They were the center of creation, a place where the spiritual and the physical met. To lose them would be unthinkable. But in 1874, everything changed when the U.S. Army, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, entered the Black Hills on an official expedition to scout potential sites for a fort. What made this expedition explosive was the discovery of gold. Reports quickly spread, newspapers exaggerated the findings, and suddenly thousands of miners surged into the Black Hills in open violation of the 1868 treaty. The government made no serious attempt to remove the trespassers. Instead, it began considering how to legally acquire the Black Hills from the Lakota, even though the treaty specifically stated that no land could be ceded without the approval of 3/4 of all adult Lakota males. Negotiators were sent to try to purchase the Black Hills, but their offers were insulting and unacceptable. The Lakota leaders, including Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, refused to sell any part of their sacred homeland. They made their position clear. The hills were not for sale at any price. Tensions continued to rise as miners, backed by unofficial military support, built permanent camps. The government, unwilling to remove the trespassers, issued an ultimatum in late 1875 demanding all Lakota bands return to their agencies. By January 31, 1876, this was impossible. Winter travel across the plains was harsh, and many bands lived far west in the hunting grounds. By declaring them hostile for failing to comply, the government gave itself justification to launch a full-scale military campaign. As spring approached, the United States mobilized for war. The plan was straightforward. 3 separate army columns would converge on the region to find, surround, and forced the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne bands back to the agencies. These forces included troops under General George Crook, General Alfred Terry, Colonel John Gibbon, and the 7th Cavalry under Custer. The military believed that superior numbers and coordinated movements would overwhelm resistance. What they underestimated was the determination, unity, and tactical skill of the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. In early June 1876, General Crook's column encountered a large force of combined Lakota and Northern Cheyenne warriors near Rosebud Creek. The battle that followed lasted 6 hours and involved thousands of combatants. Though Crook's forces held the field, the indigenous warriors under the leadership of Crazy Horse fought with such effectiveness that Crook was forced to withdraw and await reinforcements. This temporarily removed him from the campaign, a factor that would have enormous consequences. Meanwhile, thousands of Lakota and Cheyenne people had gathered in a large camp along the Little Bighorn River. It was summer, the time of the annual Sundance ceremonies, and many families had come to join in spiritual rituals, trade, and reconnect. Sitting Bull, one of the most revered spiritual leaders among the Lakota, had recently performed a Sundance in which he reportedly had a vision of soldiers falling into their camp like grasshoppers. This vision was widely interpreted as a sign they would soon face a major battle. Custer, unaware of the true strength of the camp, believed he faced only a few hundred warriors. In reality, there were perhaps 1,500 to 2,500 warriors prepared to defend their families. On June 25, 1876, Custer divided his regiment into multiple detachments, a decision that weakened his position and ultimately doomed his command. Major Marcus Reno attacked the southern end of the village first, but was quickly overwhelmed and forced to retreat to the bluffs. As fierce fighting erupted there, Custer and 5 companies advanced to the north, attempting to strike the village from another direction. What happened next has been analyzed endlessly, but certain facts remain clear. Custer's men were rapidly surrounded by Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. The fighting was intense and at close range. Warriors armed with bows, lances, rifles, and revolvers outmaneuvered and overran the soldiers. When the battle ended, Custer and all 210 men under his immediate command were dead. It was one of the most remarkable and devastating defeats in American military history, a moment that resonated around the world. But the victory at Little Bighorn, while legendary, would come at a terrible cost. The United States, shocked and enraged, poured massive military resources into the region. The goal was no longer negotiation, it was total submission. The Army relentlessly pursued Lakota and Cheyenne bands throughout the remainder of 1876 and into 1877. Starvation tactics were used. As the buffalo herds were already collapsing due to overhunting by commercial hide hunters, many bands, deprived of food and supplies, were forced to surrender at the agencies. Others attempted to flee north toward Canada. In September 1876, a significant blow occurred when troops under General Crook defeated a Lakota and Cheyenne encampment at the Battle of Slim Butte. The victory had limited strategic importance, but it provided much-needed supplies to the army and demoralized the fleeing bands. Through the harsh winter, military pressure grew relentless. Many leaders surrendered, including Red Cloud and Spotted Tail, who prioritized the survival of their people. Crazy Horse, however, continued to evade the military well into 1877. He led his people through months of hardship, but as conditions worsened and starvation became unavoidable, he finally chose to surrender at Camp Robinson. Even then, tensions remained high. Later that year, in a tragic series of misunderstandings and betrayals, Crazy Horse was killed while being held at the military post. His death marked the symbolic end of armed Lakota resistance. Meanwhile, Sitting Bull and a group of followers escaped into Canada, seeking refuge. They remained there for several years, relying on assistance from the Canadian government and nearby First Nations communities. But conditions were harsh, and eventually he returned to the United States, where he was placed on a reservation. For the Lakota, the consequences of the Great Sioux War were devastating. In 1877, the United States seized the Black Hills, violating the 1868 treaty and ignoring the legal requirement for Lakota consent. Over time, reservation boundaries were reduced, traditional practices were suppressed, and government control increased. The buffalo, central to Lakota survival, culture, and spirituality, were nearly exterminated. Yet despite these losses, Lakota identity, traditions, and resilience endured. The memory of the Black Hills, the courage of the warriors at Little Bighorn, and the teachings of leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse remain deeply meaningful today. The struggle for recognition of treaty rights continues, and the Black Hills remain at the center of a legal and moral battle that has lasted for more than a century. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Black Hills were taken illegally and awarded compensation, which the Lakota refused because the land itself, not money, is what matters. The Great Sioux War was not simply a clash of armies. It was a clash of beliefs, values, and visions of the future. It revealed the extraordinary strength of indigenous nations defending their homeland and the overwhelming power of a nation determined to expand regardless of treaties or promises. It remains one of the most powerful chapters in American history, a reminder of the cost of ambition and the enduring spirit of those who fought to protect the sacred. If you've enjoyed this historical exploration of the Great Sioux War and the fight for the Black Hills, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who appreciate deep dives into history. And if there's another moment in Native American history or any era of history you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. Your suggestions help shape what we create next.